Thanks, everyone. Well done on making it to the final day of CHI. It's a bit of a change of gears, as Matthew just said, moving from the clinical setting to a setting that might be a little bit more chaotic and messy in the form of, and from healthcare to social care as well. And Helena, I'm going to show some more pictures of people holding tablets, so I do apologize for that. But I should say I'm here on behalf of my co-authors, presenting a study into a digital feedback capture platform that we call ThoughtCloud. This work is actually a continuation of work that we already reported on at CHI, and this involved a more detailed study of an iterated version of that system. And this project is part of my PhD, which is concerned generally with how we can use off-the-shelf digital technologies to capture the voice of people that make use of social care services as a means to using that data for service design and service innovation. So just a word or two about that wider context, first of all. Social care service provision in England in the past has been traditionally delivered by local councils or local authorities. Nowadays, it's increasingly delivered by a mix of not-for-profit, charity and voluntary organisations. And these are community-based organisations providing, for example, services to support people with disabilities. It's probably important to say these organisations rely on individual contracts with councils for their funding, as well as attracting additional funding through applying to public bodies or through private donations. And importantly for this work, these organisations tend to be characterised as being driven by a core set of social values that prioritise, for example, helping disabled people have more control of their lives or have their say about issues that are important to them. And additionally, in many cases, are user-led as well, with service users being board members and involved in decision-making. And that makes a lot of sense because government policy in the UK is designed to support this. It's evolved over the last 40 years to recognise that service users should take a central role in the design and development and delivery of services, with their thoughts and experiences and opinions being taken into consideration to ensure responsive services. However, it has been observed that despite this despite this supportive policy context, progress has been to achieve greater involvement has been patchy and slow, and often concentrates at the lowest levels of involvement. And additionally, there are significant challenges in this space. It's a highly competitive, almost market space where different organisations within the same communities deliver similar resources and are applying for the same funding pot. So they're under pressure to demonstrate good performance based around agreed upon metricised outcome measures. And additionally, equally, it's not an insignificant challenge to involve people who may have multiple and varied support needs in the conversation about how to develop services. So, how do organisations involve their service users? Well, they ask them in many cases. So like many commercial organisations, they collect feedback on an ongoing basis. We worked in the past with a local organisation in the northeast of England and identified with them that collecting feedback on an ongoing basis was a significant challenge for them, and that led to us co-producing the ThoughtCloud feedback capture system that you can see a picture of here. And yes, it does bear a striking resemblance to the types of feedback capture systems that you probably encounter everywhere else in your daily lives. This one runs on an Android tablet, can be placed on a stand at the point of service delivery, and is designed to offer a low barrier for use, as well as responding to issues surrounding the inadequacies of traditional methods for collecting feedback from certain populations of care users. And as you can see, it offers the chance for organisations to pose simple questions and, in the first instance, collect metricised data in the form of these Likerts. It then goes on to pose an additional question and gives the chance for a service user to leave an audio or video message as well. And then that information goes to the server and can be logged in and reviewed, shared or annotated or used by the organisation by the way they see fit. And findings from this first initial short study that we did showed that organizations were enthusiastic for the system, and there was much praise for this sort of richer form of feedback in the form of audio and video clips. For example, it made it clear when people were assisted in giving their feedback, or that might be mediated in some way by a third party, or whether they were being asked leading questions by an event organizer. And in one case, it was appropriated as an incident reporting mechanism, and that highlighted for us the importance of timely responses to recorded feedback. So for this new study, we extend the prior work by investigating the use of a redesigned version of ThoughtCloud. So an initial priority for the redesign was making it a much more standalone system, so that it didn't require the support of the research team in order to get an idea how organizations would properly use it and more properly have a go at embedding it within their current feedback practices and looking at what practices emerge around it. So we tried to make it more flexible. The Android application was upgraded to include functionality where they could create new events on the fly. It was also redesigned to work offline so that it could be more portable, and it could be synced at a later time if a Wi-Fi connection wasn't available. The main focus, however, was on developing this a website backend where organizations could have can log in, and a member of the organization would become a sort of system admin, and then was able to share information as they saw fit. So they could invite other members, other volunteers, other staff members to have a login for the system, and also they could make sure that they were curating and not sharing any sensitive information that might be left using the system. So admins retained the power to grant access to others working in the organization. So for our field trials with this new version of ThoughtCloud, we engaged 4 organizations over a period of 4 months. And you can see this just gives you a bit of a breakdown of what those organizations were like. So we were motivated to study how it might be used across a diverse range of care organizations. So you can see we're working with Young People First, which work with young people with special educational needs and disabilities, and then also working with Horizons, who work with people with dementia, who had service users up to the age of 95. And as you can imagine, each of these organizations is performing a variety of different services in a diverse range of settings as well. So there was an opportunity to explore ThoughtCloud being used in multiple different ways. And each of these organizations had said or identified that collecting feedback was challenging for them. To make sense of the data, we used various methods to explore how it supported existing and emerging practices of collecting and responding to feedback. So throughout the trial, we were observing system use, recording system use data. We conducted semi-structured interviews at the beginning, middle, and end of the trial with members of staff from the organizations. And at the end, we held two-hour-long workshops, one with service users who had experience using the system, and one with members of staff from all of the organizations involved. And this data was brought together into one corpus and the results thematically analysed. And I'd like to go through some of the main findings that we got from the data now, but there is much more detail in the paper, and I would refer to you, if you're curious, I would refer you to the paper. So what actually happened when we gave ThoughtCloud to people? So again, people holding up tablets in people's faces. Across all of our organizations, there was fairly consistent use at collecting the feedback. As I've said, ThoughtCloud was designed to be used on a stand, but we encouraged organizations to adapt it as they saw fit. And you can see here it's being used at lunch on a field outing or a field trip by one of the organizations. And this sort of setup led to a slightly, a mode of giving feedback where people who were giving it were being observed or being overlooked as they gave feedback, which is not ideal for some people, and sometimes led to the feedback being given becoming more like a conversation with the service user leaving the feedback. At other times, when people did put it on the tablet stand, it wasn't configured properly or set to feedback capture mode. So on one occasion, we actually observed that it had timed out and gone off, so we missed some opportunities to collect feedback there. And on other occasions, people just simply forgot to use it. If people were on day trips, one organization went on a cycle trip with their service users. The tablet was in their bag and they forgot to use it by the end of the day. And in one particular case, when they had forgot to use it, but an organization leader had heard a service user say something that they wanted to capture, they encourage the service user to do a second take and actually do like a rehearsed repeat of something that they wanted to capture as well. From the other side, from a service user point of view, there was much enthusiasm and intrigue with the novelty of giving feedback in this way. This is my knitting group that I now attend on a regular basis. And as I'm sure you can imagine, these ladies don't have a bad thing to say about anyone and are extremely supportive of me, even though I've been knitting the same hat with them for 2 years. But this group meets on a weekly basis, and once the organisation had ThoughtCloud for an extended period of time, that meant that every single week someone else was coming in with a tablet and asking them to give feedback, and that led on one occasion to someone saying, "Oh no, are you doing this again? Did you not get enough the last time?" So this definitely complicates the notion of continual feedback collection, reinforced by organizations, and suggests that persistent use of the system might lead to this kind of feedback fatigue or consultation fatigue. And I guess there's a wider point here about how service users might not be connected to the value of feedback and the importance of it in a sort of community care setting, and how those organizations rely on it to demonstrate their efficacy to funders. By contrast, although we did see a lot of feedback being collected, there was comparatively little engagement with the website itself. So overall, we only recorded 35 logins for people to log in and review the feedback, with the largest organisation, as you can see here, recording the least amount of logins, and both of those logins coincided with the time when they were being interviewed about their system use and they were asked to log in. So that was good. And probably, even interestingly, the smallest organisation actually logged in the most and accounted for almost half of all the logins. So although we had gone to the effort of introducing a simple web application, use data suggests that certain feedback wasn't checked on regularly or in a timely manner or even used in any way at all, really. And this was in spite of the fact that ThoughtCloud was seen to speak directly to values around giving service users a voice and was co-produced with one of these organizations for this very purpose, yet in practice, the way in which it was used somewhat contradicted these values. So while the values underpinning these organizations emphasize giving those with care needs the opportunity to be heard, unfortunately it was rare to see that actioned. And that's particularly problematic given some of the findings from our previous field trial when people had left sensitive and critical comments that should be checked on regularly. We did, however, it wasn't all too bad. We did see some really positive examples of using the system, but they came from individuals working within organisations, specific individuals who were engaging with the feedback that they collected. So, for example, David reported that a 95-year-old gentleman left him feedback telling him that he just wasn't being active enough in sessions physically. He wasn't standing up, he wasn't charging around, and this gentleman said, "What you need to do, David, is put in more energy." And David commented that he listened to this feedback and then he was able to adapt what he was doing, so he was actually developing his practice on the basis of it. However, another example of perhaps a more innovative potential use of the system was when Grace, she was a student social worker, actually used the system to record herself at the end of a session, and so it became something of a tool for reflecting on her practice. And this is something that she commented had been integral to her training as a social worker. And indeed, this sort of critical, self-reflective practice has been shown to be invaluable in the social work literature, and it's something that many care organisations increasingly have to demonstrate engagement with and learning around. So we do think there is value, perhaps, in thinking about ThoughtCloud as a means to support this type of self-reflection on practice, so not just reflecting on user experiences, but professional practice as well. And indeed, that might mean thinking a little bit in more depth about how we can build entire processes of feedback around a technology like ThoughtCloud to support these practices within the organisation in a way that fosters an overarching culture of feedback within the organisation itself. So what does happen to digital feedback? In reality, it seems there's an emphasis on hoovering up feedback and using it as evidence for funding bids to funding bodies or to gain further resources. Our study sort of highlights an attitude to feedback that is more concerned with demonstrating the efficacy of existing practice rather than using the data collected to reflect on and improve practice. And indeed, this is reflected in literature in the public and voluntary sector that observes how outcome-based funding practices, which are prevalent in that sector, foster particular behaviours where workers become focused on how to produce required performance information. And certainly the way we observe ThoughtCloud being used, it becomes another example of problems that relate to structural issues related to how funding works in the sector generally, that encourages organisations to see feedback as a way to demonstrate user engagement that might appear consistent with government policy, that might appear consistent with their underlying values, but actually just reaffirm tokenistic approaches to involving service users in delivery and design. So that brings me to some of the implications that we have in the paper for designing feedback capture systems like ThoughtCloud in the future, and how they could be designed better to perhaps be incorporated into this idea of a culture of feedback. So future systems may need to consider a design that fosters this organisational culture of feedback that I'm talking about. So where the value of ongoing collection of feedback is communicated to those that give feedback, perhaps at the point where they leave their feedback, i.e. they get some feedback on their feedback and it's demonstrated to them how it's important, how it's being involved in service design and innovation, as well as thinking about how we can design these systems to support the practice of reviewing feedback, which we saw comparatively little of in the study. For example, pointing out that it can be used as a tool for reflection on practice. But we recognise this might involve a broader conversation about how the services themselves are designed or how the organisational processes in relation to feedback are designed. Such future systems may want to hold organisations to account in some way, so feeding back to staff of organisations about their performance as feedback reviewers, and even maybe prompting them when new feedback is waiting to be reviewed. And this was actually suggested in one of our workshops where they asked, couldn't the system just email them to let them know that there was new feedback available, and then ensure that any sensitive feedback is being picked up and reviewed on a timely manner and being accounted for. And finally, thinking about recent HCI work that's used creative data visualization methods, then maybe perhaps we can learn from this to think about ways of making the practice of listening to service users visible to the wider community. For example, we couldn't publish the videos perhaps online, but we could publish data related to not just feedback collection, but look at response rates to feedback, look at how much is being collected, and collect and share comments about how that feedback is being actioned and used in a positive and meaningful way. Because after all, what's the point in asking people what they think if we're not going to listen? And what are the ethical concerns if we're just sending that feedback into another black hole? Thank you very much. I think it's coffee time.
Well, I have a quick question. You mentioned that the organizations didn't always log in and consume the feedback that they had. Do you think it's because the multimodal format of it, because it is video and audio and it's hard to consume? Is that one of the reasons why it was?
Yeah, there's a few things. I think in the short trial they logged in and they had a manageable amount of data to look at. I think over a longer period of time when they logged in, they were just faced with like dozens and dozens of things to go through, and you're absolutely right. Look at how we make sense of videos, how we make sense of audio files. That's actually work in itself, and the system is actually intended to address some of these problems around they don't have time to collect feedback, and then we've given them another job to do. So yeah, I think that and other things definitely contribute to the lack of engagement with the
same techniques that you mentioned to kind of publicize that feedback can be used internally too, to get emails internally, to get,
Yeah, no, I think we'll definitely be looking at bringing that all in for future systems. Yeah, we just need to get on with that.
Okay. If there are no other questions.